I'm here today to talk with you a little bit about an important issue that's going to be on the ballot this June, and it's actually going to be on the primary ballot. And that can be a little confusing for folks because typically if you're a Republican or a Democrat, you pay attention to the primaries, right? If you're an independent, not so much. Well, in Longmont, everybody's going to get a ballot because I think floods and stormwater issues are nonpartisan and frankly impact everybody equally. So with that, the other thing we always need to note is that I am here today just to provide you with factual information. I am not here to encourage or advise you to vote in any particular way on the ballot issue, but rather, again, just to give the information about what it is and why it's going to be put forth in front of the voters for your consideration. And so the outline today of what we're going to be asking the voters to do, and then we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the numbers on the St. Vrain, which folks are usually interested in seeing. We're going to talk about some of the past flood mitigation projects that we've done in Longmont. We're going to take a little aerial tour of the 2013 flood last September. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to sort of improve the protection along the St. Vrain and what we intend to do. And then, of course, the obvious question, so what's that going to cost us? And then I'll end with the arguments for and against the bond issue, and then hopefully have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. And so what are the voters being asked to do? Well, what's going to be in front of voters is a consideration of a $20 million bond issue that would be funded out of the stormwater utility and essentially paid for through your monthly bills. So it's not a tax issue. It's not something that we're going to be funding through taxes, but rather through that fee. And it is intended to do channel improvements along the St. Vrain. Mother Nature has showed us what will happen along that particular channel during a flood. And the extent of it is going to go all the way west of Hover, so in the Golden Ponds area, right where Lycan's Gulch comes into the St. Vrain, essentially all the way through the city out to Martin Street. And really what we're going to create and what we're trying to work towards is a situation along our river, which is a crucial attribute to this community to make it safe. And Longmont's never had that. Since 1871, it has not had a channel that can pass the flood. And this isn't the first flood to hit Longmont. It's certainly the first one in all of our memory, but it's not the first. So speaking of floods, on the far left side there, you can see what the channel had a capacity to carry about 5,000 cubic feet per second. So that's what it could carry on September 11th, before the flood, okay? After the flood, that got cut about in half. So we're at about 2,500 CFS. Possibly you can push it up to about 3,000, but at that point, the river, the channel is damaged to the point where it will start to come out of the channel and flood. So a 100-year flood is 10,000 CFS. So you can sort of see the problem we got. We got a 10,000 CFS on a 2,500 CFS channel. Last September, however, was a biblical flood. I mean, I think that's how some folks coined it. Upwards of a 500-year flood. 18,000, I think 18,000 is even low. The numbers I've actually just seen yesterday showed flows as high as 23,000 CFS at Lyons. And so, last September, guys, was a phenomenon that is likely at that 500-year and possibly even greater flood level. And my guess is that your children, your grandchildren are going to ask you, so what happened, Grandma or Grandpa, during that flood? And then the next question is going to be, and what did you do about it? What did you do? What did you do during it, and what did you do afterwards? So I think that's what we're up against. And so, we have a history of doing flood mitigation projects in the city. So back in 2007, we had a bond issue, and the voters were very generous and supported us in that. And we had 4 big projects that we did. One was the Left-Hand Creek Channel. Another one was the Lycan's Gulch project, Spring Gulch number 2, and then last one was the Highway 66 project. And I'll just show you real quickly what those were. So the one on the left there is the Spring Gulch number 2. That's out east of the city, out near Union Reservoir. And what we did out there is we bought the land up because it's farmland. And we decided, it's better maybe to just flood the farmland occasionally if there's a flood, as opposed to trying to dig a big old channel up through there. And so that was the approach that we took out there. Down in the center is a picture of the box culvert that's going underneath Highway 119 right now, just east of Walmart. And so where you're doing the little drive around, that's the last portion of that Spring Gulch project in order to pass that flood underneath 119 and not breach the highway. That's also going to be a pedestrian walkway, and the trail will come up along Spring Gulch up into East Longmont. On the right side is the Highway 66 detention pond, and that was built north of Highway 66, up north of where the Lifebridge Church is. It's a pond that will hold 400 acre-feet of water, and it's intended to stop the overtopping of Highway 66 and flooding into North Longmont. So those projects are all completed. So the next two are Likens Gulch and Left Hand Creek. Likens Gulch on the left and Left Hand Creek on the right. Both of those projects were completed, and both of those projects were tested in this flood of 2013. And so the photograph on Likens Gulch I can show. Go ahead, Barb. Actually, let me step back since Dean's in the office is here with us today. You know, the Times Call ran this article a day or two after the flood, sort of talking about both the Left Hand Creek project and the Likens Gulch project and how they performed during the flood, and that they did a good job. And in fact, we think they actually performed better than what they were designed to, because they were stressed greater than what they were designed to do. But the point of the fact is that the community was fortunate enough to have those facilities built prior to September of 2013. And so again on the left here is Likens Gulch, and you can see at the top of the photograph there, the water's all brown and murky. That shows where the flood waters were coming down the St. Vrain and coming into and impacting Likens Gulch. And then to the bottom of that picture, you can see the water is still sort of blue and green. That means that was not impacted by the flood. And so that channel essentially took and redirected the flow back into the St. Vrain. Of course, then it got to Hover and couldn't get under the bridge and breached over Hover. And so it worked very well, which is why that's the upper end of our project. That is where we think we need to get to protect the St. Vrain. Left Hand Creek is off to the right there, and again, phenomenal flows were coming down Left Hand Creek the same time they were coming down the St. Vrain. And so our community was being impacted by 100-year plus flood flows, maybe upwards of 500-year flood flows, down multiple channels simultaneously. And Left Hand Creek performed very well, but it's still eroded. I mean, it still damaged Kanemoto Park, took out the pool and those kinds of things, but it didn't flood the houses. We had about 5 houses flood down in the Southmore Park area. Pre-project, we would have had between 100 and 200 homes flooded down there. And so now we're going to go on a little aerial photograph of the St. Vrain. So this is starting out west. We're out near the North 75th and the Pella Ponds County Park. And you can see on the far right side of the photograph where the trees are, that's where the St. Vrain River channel is supposed to be. You can also see straight ahead on here what we call the North Channel. And that's where the river had come out of its banks ahead of Longmont, upstream of Longmont, and was coming into Longmont in 3 channels as it came into Airport Road. It was this North Channel that caused us the most damage in our community. That's where the water overtopped Airport Road and came into the neighborhoods, and I'll show you that a little better here. So here's Airport Road, and this is, we're hovering just over Airport Road. You can see the median down the center of the road there. This photograph, we were over this particular area about 20 minutes earlier, and the water was just starting to creep over Airport Road. It was coming across the Zweck's farm and property, and that's when our city manager, Harold Dominguez, ordered the evacuation of those 3 neighborhoods from the helicopter. We then went up to Lyons and came back. So 20 minutes later, this is what it looked like 20 minutes later. And you can see the water is literally swirling around and coming down into Twin Peaks Circle. And so it was almost a flash flood kind of event that really came in and just inundated some of those neighborhoods on the west side. This is a similar time frame. You can see it's now exiting out of those neighborhoods, coming across the Twin Peaks Golf Course, heading towards the Valley subdivision, which was also subsequently flooded. This now we're hovering just over Sunset Street. In about the middle of the picture there is our parks facility and the Sunset Street Bridge, which is still demolished. And trust me, we are working on getting that reopened. That's the question I get all the time, is when will Sunset Street be reopened? And it's going to be in 2015, so we got another year on that. But again, you can see the water was flowing north of the river in a huge way coming through those businesses. And here we are now just east of the Pratt Street overpass, looking back towards the west. That's Home Budget, the big building in the center. Off on the left side is the Royal Mobile Home Park. You can see the entire Longmont Business Park area was flooded and heavily damaged. Those businesses sustained heavy damage in that area. Now we're hovering over the Royal Mobile Home Park. Literally right down below us was the trailers. You can see the bridge. You can still see parts of the bridge there, but the road is inundated on both sides because the river was already out of its channel, and so it was just finding its way through our city. At one point or another, the river was upwards of a mile wide as it came through Longmont. Here we're hovering over about First and Main, looking south on Main Street. And again, the river is about a half mile south of First Avenue. And, but the water was topping over near First Avenue and running, again, right through those business parks. This is looking back to the east, out towards the sugar factory. And you can sort of get a sense of not only the St. Vrain, but you can also see left hand coming in on the top right of the picture. And so those two channels were converging and really then impacting our neighbors to the east out in Weld County. And of course our wastewater plant, this is what the wastewater plant looked like on Thursday. It hadn't flooded yet. The plant actually flooded on Friday when the peak of the flow was still coming through and it actually breached around and flooded the plant. Took us offline for about 48 hours, but then we were back on and treating. Our staff did a great job, sort of almost went down with the ship, but they stayed there as long as they could and kept the plant running as long as they could. And so that's sort of a little, a reminder of what that flood was. So the bond issue that we're looking at right now, we intend to use those funds to begin a phased project to go up the St. Vrain. We have done engineering work to lay out what those stream modifications would look like. We've broken the project into about 5 key reaches, all the way from Martin Street up to west of Hover, and we've costed it out. And so the project is going to be multi-year though. It's like a 5 to 10 year project. This is not something that's going to be happening really quick. And so the ultimate question is, so what's this going to cost us, right? So our project costs right now are in the range of 65 to 80 million. And you'd think, gosh, we could get a little closer than that. But what that represents are different channel configurations, whether we put in walls or we don't put in walls and those kinds of things. And so that's the range of the two or three different alternatives that we're looking at. What we are looking to do, if the voters do choose to pass this particular bond issue, is we would take that bond money and aggregate it with other local funds that we currently have, and we can come up to about $48 million. And I'll show you the breakout of that. So total project cost is 65 to 80 million. We've already got funded about 8.5 million out of the street fund to do the Main Street, South Pratt, and Sunset projects. Those bridges are at about $8.5 million price tag. The next line item is the bond issue. The next one down is the street fund. We are looking to get another $7 million out of the street fund in order to replace the Hover Street Bridge and the Boston Avenue Bridge. Open space and water. There are some water features along the river, obviously, some diversions and those kinds of things that need to be rebuilt. We'd also use the Conservation Trust Fund because that was the fund that we used to build the Greenway in the first place, and we would draw on that fund as well. It's a much smaller fund though. It doesn't have the funding capability. And then we got the FEMA alternate projects, that $10 million number. That's one that if anybody's worked with the federal government and trying to get funding, that is a longer term proposition, but is one that we are very aggressively pursuing. And we are committed to getting as many federal dollars into our community to assist us with this rebuild as we can. So we have a gap. $17.5 to $32.5 million, right? That's still sort of where we're looking. So how would we fill that gap? Well, it is with this funding that we're going to try to, we are working to get funding out of 3 different key agencies, the Corps of Engineers, FEMA, and the Community Development Block Grant Program. So with that, we have made applications, and these are all initial applications into these agencies. CDBGR at about $6 million, the Corps of Engineers at $9.5 million, and then FEMA's the big one, $37 million, that we're hoping to get a portion of that. And the reality is, folks, you put in an application, unless you are New York City or something, you don't probably get your entire request. But you still go in big and you try to get everything you can, and that's what Longmont's doing. We are, frankly, we're not being shy about this, and we're going after every dollar we can. And I do believe we are going to be successful to get the federal dollars. So part of our strategy is to go after those dollars, but it takes a local match in order for that to be successful. Which is one of the arguments I'm going to talk to you about for the bond issue. But first I'll start with the arguments against it. The first one is, the city shouldn't go into public debt for projects of this type. We should find the money somewhere else. We should take it from Sean's budget. No, I'm just kidding. He's offered everything, but it just, what a guy, right? The other way is that rates and fees should be increased, and we should save our money, collect the money over time, and then go build a project, sort of a pay-as-you-go approach. The other is that cash funding would result, even though it's going to result in higher rates for a few years, they ultimately and potentially come down because you don't have the interest from a bond issuance. The other one is that the city shouldn't be responsible for protecting houses and businesses that have been built in the flood zone. And then the last is that the city should not make large investments in flood mitigation because a September 13 flood are a very rare event. And those are, I think, are all legitimate arguments against a storm bond. So some arguments for it is that by issuing these, that we're able to complete the project sooner. It's sort of like getting the mortgage on your house. If you waited to save up all your money till you could buy your house, you wouldn't move into your house real quick. At least I wouldn't. Maybe some of you would move in quicker. The other is that bonds result in user rates that are lower than if you paid for cash, and it also extends out that obligation to the folks that are here today as well as future folks that move into our community, because it's going to be over a 20-year time period. The ballot issue doesn't increase taxes or user fees, but let me be clear, everybody that lives in Longmont, your user fees went from $7.77 up to $13.05 in January. And we know that and appreciate that. What we're saying is that $13.05 is sufficient to cover the debt service for this $20 million bond. We don't need to raise the rates or the fees to cover that. Also, by issuing these bonds, it puts the city in a stronger position when we are making application to the federal government. A lot of times what they ask, almost always what they ask, is what is the local match? What are you bringing to the table to match up with our dollars? In other words, is there community support to do what you're proposing to do? And I think Longmont would be able to come to the table with those dollars. So that's my presentation. So the question is that the use fee in January is unrelated. No, it actually is related, because we knew in January, the flood had happened in September. We knew that one of the options that we went to the city council with was to raise the rates to cover a debt service, okay? We had another option that would have raised the rates even higher to handle an even bigger bond issue. And the recommendation from our staff was, well, first of all, that we don't think local ratepayers need to come with all the dollars. And so we recommended the lower one, only do the 20 million. But they are related, and that's what occurred back in December, actually, when the council took the action.
What form does the dollars that we pay come in? Is it a fixed rate per household?
Yeah. So the question is, if 2A passes, what happens with my monthly storm sewer fee? There won't be any change. It will still be $13.05 because it's already embedded in that $13.05 rate. It won't change, it won't go up. Because the debt service is already programmed into the cash flow pro formas.
Does it end at a certain?
It's a 20-year. Yes, Rick?
Is there a number for flood mitigation? How much is protecting public property versus private property?
So the question is there a number on sort of the breakout between protecting private and public property? I don't have that number, Rick, but that is some of the criteria that we have to go through when we're applying for, especially for the community development block grant money. They want to see a cost benefit, as does FEMA. And so that equation will come into play when we're looking at the value of the private property as well as the value of the public structures. I don't have that in the top of my head, but my head tells me the value of the private is probably greater than the value of the public. Over here.
Your chart that showed the channel got smaller. What is the concern with spring
Runoff?
Yeah.
So the question is, since our channel will only carry about 2,500 CFS, what's our sort of level of concern with runoff coming up? And so that 2,500 CFS, we have modeled the river to know that it will be able to carry that amount. And we've also, in conjunction with Boulder County, made key improvements to some of the breaches on the river and repaired it. And so we're confident that we're going to be able to carry about that flow rate. That flow rate is greater than any flow rate that we've seen come down the St. Vrain in the last 30 years, except for last September. And so that was the criteria that we looked at, and that was the criteria that we worked with FEMA on to get the channel to carry that capacity. And so we think we're in pretty good shape. But Mother Nature has surprised us in the past, and I'm sure could again.
But there's probably a difference between runoff and if you get a lot of rain.
Yes. And so runoff is affected by key things. The first one is the snowpack. That represents the potential that's sitting up in the hills. And right now it's pretty high. We're between 140 and 150% of average. Keep in mind, though, those averages become sort of very inaccurate as you're on the downhill side, as things start to melt. But we have a lot of snow up there. So what really triggers a high runoff is high temperatures going very high and staying there in late May, coupled with rain. And if you get rain on top of the snow, it melts the snow. And so those are the ingredients that we are really trying to be mindful of and watching. Of course, we have no control over it. And so we are doing programs right now. We have our River Watch program where our staff is going up and down the St. Vrain, looking at all the bridges, making sure there's not debris buildup on those. We also have on the city website live cameras, 3 different locations along the river, so folks can see for themselves what the flow is doing. So we have a heightened sense of preparedness and a heightened sense of staff readiness to respond to issues. Yes?
Yeah, it says in the brochure, and I think you said it as well, that this will enable the city to construct phase 1. What's phase 2?
We're showing all phases up here. So the question is that the brochure is saying that these funds will help us to fund phase 1. Well, phase 1 is the first phase. That's the first part, and we start at the lower end and work ourselves up the river. What we're trying to show in this overall slide show today is how you fund the entire project. That's essentially what the City Council wanted to know. It's good to know what you're going to do with this initial dollars, but how do we get it done? How do we get the entire project done? And so the initial $20 million is going to be applied towards that first phase, and it's also going to be applied as the local dollars to secure those additional grant dollars. Yes?
As we do these different projects, different phases, do you anticipate that we are or are not going to have to play the ED trump card to provide the channel, the eminent domain?
So given that question is coming from Mayor Combs, the question is, will we have to secure land through eminent domain? You know, we have been in contact with a lot of the property owners along the St. Vrain and through our community, and they are wonderful people to work with. And so I absolutely am hoping we do not have to do that. I haven't ran into anybody yet that doesn't get it. You know, going through a flood really focuses folks to understand what we're up against. And many folks are coming to us and saying, don't worry, just get it done. I don't want to go through this nightmare again. So our goal in Longmont is always to avoid that every time we can. Yes?
So we spend all this money to do the flood mitigation, and then say something happens like it did in September where it breaches all the gravel ponds and
Great.
and lines. It doesn't really do any good because it just changes the whole course of the river. So
What do we do about
spend all
that?
this money here, but it may not even matter.
So the question is, are we being short-sighted by spending all this money downstream of Airport Road as opposed to looking west? Great question, and thank you. We are not doing that. We are also working with the property owners in Boulder County, west of the city, all the way to Lyons. Two efforts are getting underway. One is the St. Vrain master planning effort that's going to look at the entire channel as it comes out of the canyon all the way to its confluence with Boulder Creek east of the city. The other thing we are working on is we are working with landowners and we are going to be building channels that will redirect the water back to that bridge at Airport Road. You know, we absolutely have to look west of the city, and that will absolutely be part of what we are doing. Yes?
Maybe I'm not understanding this, because if this bond doesn't pass, and you've already increased the fees.
What then?
I mean, you know,
Right.
it seems to me like it's already done. Why do you have to?
So the question is, we've already increased the fees. Why are we having an election? Why are we doing that? Well, because in Longmont, our city charter restricts how we can issue debt. We cannot issue debt except for through a vote of the people. There are some very narrow areas where we can do it, say in the water fund for a small amount. But in general, your Longmont City Charter, which I think is an awesome document, puts that decision in the hands of the voters. So the city council, by vote, cannot issue debt. Only the citizens can decide that. Does that help?
Dale, funding question. I noticed on the chart they didn't have any state dollars. Are there no state dollars available? And two, is the county providing any funding for Sunset Bridge?
Two questions. So the questions were, how come there's no state dollars shown on these charts, and how is the county, or to what extent is the county participating in Sunset Street Bridge? I'll do Sunset Street Bridge first. You know, we are working with the Federal Highway Authority. They are going to be the funders of that bridge replacement. And they initially offered us $850,000 to just fill in the breach, open the bridge, you're good to go. And we said no to that. We and the county both said no and no thank you. We want a structure that will pass a 100-year storm through our community. So we need a bridge about twice the size of Sunset. So and we've been successful, and largely because of the county. They have been the agency because it's their bridge. We're now up to about 2.2 to 2.8 million coming in from the Federal Highway Authority. So sometimes it's good to say no to that first offer and go what you know to need. And so that is how the county is helping with that. And the city and the county have an IGA where we will split costs that are not federally funded on that bridge. Okay. On the issue of the state, you know, the state has provided funding through the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Those funds have gone largely to the irrigation ditches. And the state is also paying 12.5% of all the FEMA damages in our community. So FEMA pays about 75%. So that's a 25% gap yet. The state of Colorado is paying 12.5% of that, which leaves 12.5% for us locally. So the state of Colorado is in this big with us. Not so much going forward on this new channel, but they have been so far.